Dr. Robert Glover talks about, like these nice guy syndromes where the vast majority of guys sort of create these covert contracts in their head and they try to please women and they try to do things to sort of like win them over. And I get it. We've all been there. I've done it before, certainly. But it's not what they respond positively to. I think we saw this last night on Ladies' Night. You often see it, during the conversations when Moff and Spencer are running the show. But women will often say, guys need to be more emotional and in touch and more sensitive and emotional intelligence. You start hearing shit like this in therapy and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, we've been hearing that stuff for years. And I guess the question that we should be asking ourselves as dudes is, how is that working out for men? How is that working out for you? How is that working out for me? How has that worked out in general? And you come to a realization at some point that until women start responding positively and with enthusiasm to softer, weaker, beta, more agreeable men, you kind of shift your you shift your perspective, you shift the way that you handle things, you sort of shift the way that you deal with relationship conflict and details and the intricacies and all those sorts of things to what works. And sometimes the very things that women don't like or want you to stop doing tend to be good for the relationship. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I don't know if it was on a Zoom call or privately. But I've been uploading these videos since 2014. It's been 11 years now. I'm on my 11th year. I've read every single Evo Psych study that comes up whenever a friend says, hey, there's this new book that came out. You got to check it out. It's up your alley. Download it and listen to it. I've had lots of conversations. I've probably learned more in the last year than I have in the entire 11 years, if I'm being honest. So most of my perspective remained relatively consistent with some changes. I've got a few notes over here, so you might see some updates to it. But the one thing that I can say with absolute certainty is that most guys are too nice. They're too agreeable. They're too willing to please. And why wouldn't we be that way? Because often you fall in love with a woman and you want to please her. But that's a tragic mistake. That's a bad strategy. Saying yes and agreeing with everything and letting her get away with certain things, which, again, we'll talk about. I made a note over here to talk about a good friend of mine. We're going to call him Larry. I'm going to send this episode to my friend and he'll know that I'm speaking about him. And, we'll compare Larry to your average Joe, 95% of guys out there who we'll call Barry. And Larry and Barry, the only thing they have in common is they're men. They're born as biological men. The biggest difference between Larry and most men is that he only does what he wants to do. Very good friend of mine. Love the guy to bits. If he called me right now and said, I need your help with something, I'd turn off the show and, I'd take care of it for him. He's that kind of guy. But, we've had a number of conversations, we've done a lot of trips together. And, one thing that's been clear about his stance and his position in long-term relationships. And if I'm being honest, he goes a little bit further than probably what he should for a guy that's looking for a long-term relationship. But I don't think he's looking for a long-term relationship. I don't think that fit is there for him just yet. I'm not saying that won't ever be, and I think he's probably the kind of guy that might be open to it. But in the vast majority of cases, saying no to things that you don't want to do is actually a very good strategy. And I think this is probably one of the most important lessons I want you guys to take away from this podcast is saying no. As an example, most of his relationships don't last very long. He meets a gal, witty banter, they get drunk, hook up, and they start having some fun. And maybe they start dating, maybe they start going out, they have dinner, they get together. And that might go for a few weeks to a few months, but it never seems to go any longer than a few months for this guy. And he's okay with that. It usually ends because she starts making requests of him that Larry is unwilling to fulfill. Hey, it's my nephew's birthday party this weekend. We've been seeing each other for 4 months. I think it'd be cool if you came and, hung out for a few hours and, met my family and my nephew and sang him happy birthday and all that sort of stuff. And he's the kind of guy who'd be like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I think I'm going to go do something else instead. So, you go ahead, sort of thing. And that's usually like the pivot point where these women will be like, okay, fine, I guess. And then it just sort of falls apart from there. So that's one end of the spectrum, a very strong end of the spectrum, and a very good position to take if you never, ever, ever, ever want to go through betatization through 1,000 concessions. Because Larry's position is essentially, yeah, I'm never going to do anything that I don't want to do. I remember having this conversation. I've shared the story, probably prior, but I'll mention it again because I know there's a lot of newer viewers to the channel and stuff like that. But I remember dating this gal in my 20s, and I liked her. I just wasn't like, I didn't like her as much as she liked me, if you know what I mean. And she lived downtown Toronto. I didn't really like driving all the way downtown to deal with shit. I rode a motorcycle at that time. There's really nowhere to park it overnight. People downtown are a little more liberal. They're kind of weird. They have these like weird obsessions with funky breakfast places and, stuff like that. But it was what it was. And, we dated for a while, and I never said yes to any of her shit. Literally nothing. It was like, and I think it was because I wasn't as much about her as she was about me. It's not that she was unattractive or a bad person. She was just she was a pleasant kind of like mid, and there would be things that come up like, hey, I'd like you to meet my grandmother. She's at this home, and, she was so cool, and she traveled the world. And, she even went up to the Arctic Circle, and, look at all these paintings that she did and blah, 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 blah. And I was just like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. You can go hang out with your grandmother, if you want to go see her or something like that. Or I remember one of the other things that was contentious for was she had this fluffy white dog. What are they called? Bichons. They're non-shedding dogs. They're absolutely harmless. I don't even think they bark. They're just fluff balls that women like. And I remember there was an event in Toronto, something called Woofstock, if I'm not mistaken, or some shit like that. And I'm like, okay. She's like, yeah, let's go to Woofstock or something like that. And I'm like, what's that? Oh, it's a dog festival. And, there'll be all these cute dogs, and they sell garments and wear and little shoes and stuff like that. And I'm like, nah, no, I'm not going to do that. You go have fun. I'm going to go out with the boys. We're going to ride the motorcycle sort of thing. And that's what we'll be up to. And if there's anything that she invited me to that seemed interesting, like, hey, you want to come up to my cottage, then I probably would have said yes, because that's the kind of shit that I like, sunshine, boats, I don't really like big cities and all the giant buildings and all that sort of stuff. I prefer nature and, decks and cottages and stuff like that. So that obviously didn't last very long for me, maybe like a year or something like that, because I said no so many times to just about everything, which is the better way to do things, if I'm being absolutely honest. All right, guys, I really hope that you enjoyed that clip. If you want to check out the full-length podcast episode, you can find that right over here. Also, make sure you visit my website over here, where you'll find my supplements, the opportunity to book me privately one-on-one for coaching, and most importantly, my new School of Unplugging, which you'll find on the courses tab. Newer to the channel, hit subscribe.